For decades, the United States and Europe have been deeply interconnected through military alliances, economic partnerships, and cultural ties. The transatlantic relationship has been a cornerstone of global stability. But what if the U.S. were to lose Europe, whether through political divergence, economic competition, or a shift in alliances? The consequences would be profound. In this video, we explore 10 key things the U.S. would lose if it lost Europe. The loss of NATO and military dominance in Europe. One of the biggest losses would be the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which has served as a key military alliance since 1949. NATO has ensured European security and extended American military influence across the continent. If Europe disengaged from the U.S., NATO could weaken or dissolve entirely. This would mean losing military bases in strategic locations like Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. These bases provide the U.S. with rapid response capabilities for crises in the Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe. Without them, America would have to rely on fewer overseas bases or shift its focus entirely to Asia. Additionally, Russia would gain more influence over Eastern Europe, increasing the likelihood of instability in the region. The end of the U.S. dollar's dominance in Europe. The U.S. dollar has long been the world's reserve currency, but Europe plays a key role in maintaining that status. The European Union (EU) conducts a significant portion of its trade in dollars, keeping demand high. If the U.S. lost Europe, the EU might move toward the euro or even work with China to promote the yuan. This could reduce global demand for the dollar, leading to inflation in the U.S. and making imports more expensive. Additionally, without European financial centers like London and Frankfurt cooperating with Wall Street, American banks would lose access to lucrative markets, weakening the U.S. financial sector. A decline in global trade and economic power. The EU is one of the U.S.'s largest trading partners. If Europe distanced itself, trade barriers could rise, affecting industries like technology, energy, and agriculture. The U.S. exports billions of dollars in goods to Europe, from aircraft to pharmaceuticals. Losing this market would force American businesses to find new customers in regions with less purchasing power or stronger local competitors. Additionally, the EU and U.S. often coordinate economic sanctions against adversaries like Russia and Iran. Without European cooperation, U.S. sanctions would become less effective, reducing America's ability to pressure rival nations through economic means. Weakened intelligence and security cooperation. The U.S. and Europe share vast amounts of intelligence through agencies like Five Eyes, which includes the UK, and Europol. This cooperation is essential for counter-terrorism, cyber threats, and tracking international criminal networks. If the U.S. lost Europe, intelligence sharing would decline, making it harder to track terrorist groups, monitor Russian and Chinese cyber operations, and prevent attacks on American soil. European law enforcement agencies are crucial partners in fighting organized crime, including drug trafficking and human smuggling. Losing these partnerships would weaken America's ability to combat global security threats. A reduction in cultural influence and soft power. Hollywood, American music, and fashion dominate global culture, but Europe is a key market and influencer of global trends. The U.S. benefits immensely from its cultural ties with Europe, as American companies sell billions in entertainment products there. If the U.S. lost Europe, countries might start favoring local or non-American content. European governments could push for more regulations on U.S. tech and media companies, reducing their influence. Additionally, universities and research collaborations between the U.S. and Europe, some of the most advanced in the world, would decline, weakening scientific and technological innovation. Increased geopolitical isolation. The U.S. relies on European allies to maintain diplomatic pressure on global issues, from climate change to human rights. Losing Europe would leave America more isolated on the world stage, forcing it to rely more on unpredictable allies like India or Gulf states. For example, on issues like nuclear agreements with Iran or climate policies, the U.S. and EU have often worked together to present a united front. Without Europe, American diplomatic efforts would have less legitimacy and would be easier for adversaries like China and Russia to counter. less influence in Africa and the Middle East. Europe has strong historical ties with Africa and the Middle East, and the US often works with European powers like France and the UK on military and economic issues in these regions. If the US lost Europe, it would lose access to joint military operations, intelligence, and economic partnerships in these areas. For instance, counter-terrorism efforts in Africa, where France plays a leading role, would become less coordinated, giving extremist groups more room to grow. Likewise, the Middle East could see a rise in Chinese or Russian influence as the US loses key European allies in the region. Decline in high-tech and industrial cooperation. The US and Europe lead the world in high-tech industries, including aerospace, artificial intelligence, and pharmaceuticals. Many of the world's biggest tech collaborations, like Airbus and the International Space Station, involve American-European partnerships. If the US lost Europe, technological collaboration would slow, making it harder to compete with China's rapidly growing tech sector. Additionally, European nations might favor China or other partners over American companies when purchasing technology, hurting US industries. Higher energy costs and reduced energy security. The US and Europe collaborate on energy security, including natural gas supplies, renewable energy research, and sanctions on oil-exporting nations like Russia. Losing Europe could mean less coordination on energy policy, leading to price volatility in global markets. For example, Europe plays a crucial role in sanctioning Russian oil and gas. If the EU pursued its own energy strategies without the US, it might ease restrictions on Russia, reducing the effectiveness of American energy policies. Additionally, American energy companies would lose key European customers, leading to reduced profits in sectors like liquefied natural gas. A stronger China and Russia on the world stage. Perhaps the biggest consequence of losing Europe would be the rise of China and Russia as dominant global powers. The US and Europe together make up a massive share of the global economy and military power. If Europe moved closer to China or became more independent, the US would struggle to counterbalance these emerging superpowers. China has been expanding its influence in Europe through investments and trade deals. If the EU aligned more with China, it could weaken US efforts to contain Chinese expansion in Asia and beyond. Likewise, Russia would gain a freer hand in Ukraine and Eastern Europe without US-EU coordination, shifting global power away from the West. Losing Europe would be a geopolitical, economic, and military disaster for the United States. From military dominance to global trade, intelligence sharing to energy security, the US and Europe are deeply intertwined. While some Americans may see Europe as just another ally, the reality is that Europe is one of the most valuable partners America has. If the US ever lost Europe, the world order would shift dramatically, leaving America weaker, more isolated, and more vulnerable to emerging global powers. That's why the transatlantic alliance remains one of the most important relationships in the modern world.